our consciousness is a variety of inputs coming in one basic understanding. And we have, let's say, 1,000 inputs coming in. It's much more than this, but to keep it simple, our brain might be constructing and our body may be constructing reality from like 10 of those or something. Like there's so much that is just not actively presented to our reality. And you can shift that focus depending on what you're doing. For example, like yoga nidra, if you lay down and all of a sudden, the nice girl speaking in your ear saying, feel your thumb, now your right index finger. And you'll be like, your consciousness will center over that part and you shift from one arm. Now you're in the elbow, the shoulder, heart space. You go to the other side. Like you're no longer focused here in the brain like most people, or a lot of people say heart focus, which is beautiful, but you can shift that around wherever you want. You go down to your pinky toe. Pinky toe has a lot to say. So it's true. So that is like this more fluid, all those inputs are constantly coming in, but how often are we aware of them or consciously recognizing them? I mean, a very simple example is just like, how often do you speak to your heart and say, thank you, heart, for beating for me every single second, every single day? Like that's a really important thing to do. Like, thank you, heart. And like reciprocally sending that consciousness to it. So if we are fundamentally receiving all this energy because it is interacting with us across the entire light spectrum. There's other things too, quantum understandings. And again, we have these overlaps with the Schumann resonances in our brain, our biofield, our heart rhythms. But is it being constructed into something that we can see ourselves? Like what we see in our reality is like the one metaphor is that it is the operating system over all the code, right? And so you have all these zeros and ones. You also have the hardware, but we're using Windows or Mac OS. It's basically the same with our reality. And who's to say, like, they definitely didn't run Windows 10 back then. They had something way better. So I think that, yeah, it's very possible. And like, if you don't have written records, then how do you leave signs of that? I mean, we see interesting carvings and paintings and we try to have these explanations for them, but sometimes there's no good way to understand it. There's a whole bunch of objects, which if we dropped in the ground and they exhumed like 3,000 years later, it'd be like, what the heck is this? It makes no sense. Take any part on a bike, right? And you like just take one cog on a bike and take the rest away. They're like, what the heck is this for? They're gonna have no understanding. It's the same thing. So our archaeology is really limited, but it's a really interesting idea that you bring up, seeing these lines, be able to navigate with them. I don't say it's not impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder where, with technology, where it's headed, what's going to be possible as we step into, and maybe this is where some of the astrology comes in for you now, in terms of we're stepping out of the age of Pisces from a water sign into this more age of Aquarius with an air sign, and what's happening at this moment in terms of what the future of this sort of looks like.
Yeah, there's a lot of people talking about this, and we're going to continue, of course, talking about it. We're seeing a shift into more volatile weather, it seems, on our planet. That's air element, and air in general is very mutable and can change quickly. Um, Air can be stable. I mean, some places are kind of like always have a wind blowing, like Bodega Bay in California. It's like always windy coming out the Pacific going inland. But in general, air is more fluid, dynamic. And so I think that's going to be characteristic of the energies and just our society and the planet at large. And this age of Aquarius shift is really interesting. When does that occur is a big question that's not answered. We know the rate of precession now. There's a big open question as to what is causing precession. I talk about this actually a lot in my Planetary Resonances e-course, because the current understanding for the mainstream is that Earth has this wobble in its tilt axis. So it's always wobbling, and this accounts for the equinoxes moving through the zodiac. There's a slight shift, 1 degree every 72 years through the zodiac of now this constellation is on the horizon, housing the sun during the equinox. And then you have, of course, a different constellation for solstice and the September equinox and then the winter solstice. But we see everything has like an elliptical orbit in space. And so these equations for the wobble of the earth are really complex, and they're always updating them, and they have like all these variables. And in general, if we go by like the work of Buckminster Fuller and a lot of other people, the simpler something is, the more likely it is to be true. And if you have to add all these constants in, you're trying to make something fit that fundamentally isn't the answer.
Bridging the
So
gaps. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't think Earth has this wobble, and there's some evidence because we have a moon, and its lunar rotation around the Earth, uh, quite strong evidence that confirms that. But if the entire sun was traveling on an elliptical orbit as it moved through the galaxy, that could explain the precession of the equinoxes. And so there would be a period in time where that precession would be fastest, because in an elliptical orbit, sometimes your orbital velocity is faster, other times it's slower. For example, Sedna, the transit-Newtonian dwarf object, which has a about 11,400 year cycle in its orbit around the sun, it's traveling at its fastest right now because it's getting close to perihelion, which is 2076. That's a big shift that we're going through. That's also happening in Gemini, more air energy. But when it's all the way out at the very far edge of its elliptical orbit, it's moving the slowest. So it's moving through the zodiac super slowly. And so precession probably isn't fixed in its speed. Right now they're measuring at 72, but you go back in time and it was moving at different velocities. Basically, the degree change per year was less. And so they've been like updating this. And people kind of discount some of these really early measurements from like 2,000 years ago, 2,200 years ago, or even from the Greeks, perhaps even from the Babylonians. They may have known about it as well. But I think there's ample evidence that precession is shifting, which means that the conventional model of precession, 72 years for a degree, would put Age of Aquarius starting in like 2050 AD or 2500 AD. But it seems to be accelerating, which means that Age of Aquarius would start sooner. And so I'm kind of laying out the groundwork of when I think that's going to happen. And we see right now Pluto going through Aquarius, kind of waking all those energies up. And I think what's very much going to be an end to the age of Pisces will when Pluto goes through Pisces next. And that's in 2044 to about 2060 something, maybe like 2067 or 2068. And that's right before 2100, which based on my model precession is when all of a sudden Aquarius is going to be housing the sun during the equinox, the March equinox. So what better way to herald the end of the age of Pisces than Pluto moving through Pisces, where it won't be again for another 250 years. So I think we're in this very significant shift as it relates to going from Pisces to Aquarius with the age. And we're going into Saturnian energies, away from these more nebulous domains, moving into this more kind of logical, but also very open and spiritual dimension, like technologically based too. The male expression of Saturn, or he's a little bit more of a maverick, and also now the modern ruler is Uranus, and he's the planet or the archetypal energy god, whatever you want to say, of change, electricity, and technology. So consciousness, they're very Promethean, gave fire to man. So I think what we have coming up is really, really significant. It's going to take time to play out. Some people are already receiving shifts, but people are always receiving shifts and updates and things. And how that relates to the Earth geophysically is going to be interesting. How that relates to things like the Schumann resonances, perhaps it's going to unlock certain information in those energy fields and make them accessible for the first time in a long time. Because they've been around again for millions of years. So they've been through a lot of Age of Aquariuses, right? They've been through a lot of these different energies. And I can imagine, the holographic like interference pattern that is always there, changing with this is going to like open up new doors and make things accessible to people that hasn't been accessible before. and how that influences us. And it's going to be fast. There's going to be sudden shifts that are unpredicted, but going to be for our benefit overall, I think. I'm really excited.
Hey there, Inspired Evolutionary. If you absolutely loved this, well then here's a full conversation with this guest on the Inspired Evolution podcast. Check it out now.